A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
So more today on the fact that our religious freedoms have been evaporating before our very eyes. And of course, that means a loss of freedoms for every Australian when governments tell you what you can believe and what you can't believe. Well, there is a groundswell that's happening in states like Victoria with moves to wind back policies that have stolen religious freedoms away. Let's check in with Mike Southon, who's Executive Director of Freedom for Faith. Hey, Mike, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be back.
Mike, I think listeners might be impressed by the fact that at Freedom for Faith, you're not just waiting around for the next election time frame. There's a few of those coming up, but you've got a whole lot of things active right now.
Yeah, we've seen over the past couple of years is that when we actually try to be on the front foot and put plans in place well before elections, well before issues become major, then we actually can be effective at advocating and protecting religious freedom.
If you're working hard all the time, you can identify, can't you, those sorts of groundswells that arise. And I think you've identified a groundswell in Victoria to wind back a whole bunch of policies that have basically robbed the religious freedom of Victorians. How do you reflect on Victoria and what's happening there?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that pretty much every bad idea that's come in Australia that's attacked religious freedom has started in Victoria. Whether it's the conversion therapy legislation that's been moving around the country, or whether it's the restrictions to speech or restrictions to faith-based organisations being able to employ people based on what they believe. Victoria has been at the forefront of restricting religious freedom. And this is because the Victorian government, as it currently stands, has not been effectively challenged, either arguably by the opposition or by people on the ground pushing back. And what we really want to do is help churches and resource churches to be able to push hard in a loving and godly way back at some of these policies. And let's use the coming election as an opportunity to see if we can get some of these policies wound back.
Interesting to talk about the way that some of these policies take effect. Religious freedoms stolen or robbed. I mean, we can use those sorts of terms, but there's been like a contagion effect, hasn't there? So far as you say, the worst of these seem to have started in Victoria, but then it catches on to other states, perhaps other premiers who are similar ideologically, but it's like a contagion, and we're under that sort of threat now. It's just continuing to spread around Australia.
Absolutely. The conversion practices legislation is a perfect example. So this is legislation that, in theory, is supposed to prevent people from being coerced and forced to change their sexuality and their gender. That's what the intention of the legislation is supposed to be. But Victoria created legislation which made it actively illegal for you to just pray with somebody to stay celibate. If they weren't married, had desires that they didn't want to be acting on, and asked you, could you pray for me so I could stay faithful to Jesus, I could stay celibate, it would be illegal to pray that prayer in Victoria. Now, this kind of legislation started to roll out into other parts of the country. So New South Wales, legislation very similar to this was introduced. Now, under a lot of pressure at work, we worked very hard with the churches in New South Wales and the New South Wales government. The legislation that resulted was somewhat better than Victoria. And then again, in South Australia, we got legislation that was somewhat better again. But this whole idea of it's bad to be able to pray with somebody for them to stay celibate, these sorts of ideas start in Victoria predominantly. And then, yes, we have to fight state by state to stop them from spreading.
So we're talking criminalisation of church leaders, even criminalisation of families who want to do the best thing, protect their own children. Do you think Victorians understand the toxic nature of these laws, or is it just something that's slipped in under the radar and everyone just sort of, took that pill?
Well, I actually think that Victoria is the perfect example of why we need two strong political parties at all times. The worst thing that we get in Australia is an unchallenged government, a government who know they're going to win the next election and probably the election after that. So there has been a weakness in the Victorian opposition. And so I don't think the average Victorian person approves of a lot of these policies that are coming through. When you sit down and explain to them, it actually means that church people can't do this. They wouldn't agree to that. But first of all, they haven't actually been clearly told this is what the law does. More effectively, even then, Labor have had a clear run of it for quite a long time, and an unchallenged government on either side just ends up making really, really bad decisions and not being held accountable by the people.
So you need an electable opposition, a strong opposition, one that actually is waiting in the wings, ready to take power if the people decide to cast their vote that way. You're saying here that Victoria hasn't had that strength of opposition. Groups like yours, Freedom for Faith, are you working to help oppositions, say like the Victorian opposition, to actually understand these issues a little more so that they can actually take, some significant policy stands?
Well, yeah, we work with all major parties to educate them on these religious freedom issues, and we don't pick sides. We don't have preferred parties. What we've seen, particularly in New South Wales, is when there are two parties who are really struggling hard, and in this case, we've currently got a minority government in New South Wales. The Labor Party listens to people of faith because it knows that it needs us to get elected. And so we're not in any sense helping any political party to get stronger, but we're definitely working with every party to educate them on religious freedom issues. Now, Victoria is going to see a bit of a change this time around because the polling is now incredibly tight. And we are looking at an election where both parties are going to have to work very, very hard to get people's votes. And so, again, we're not trying to get people to vote for one party or another. But what we really want to do is help both parties to understand this is what it takes to get a Christian person to be voting for you. If you're attacking religious freedom, then you're not going to be getting a lot of Christians voting for you. So educating the parties, if you are moderated on these issues, if you're sensible on these issues, then all of a sudden Christians will find themselves able to vote for you. And the great advantage we have leading into the Victorian election is I think we're going to have a very close vote, which is our opportunity for our voice to be heard.
And as you say, you've got parties who will listen to you when they recognise that there's a threat. When you've got parties that have such a majority that there is no threat, they do their own thing, and you've got these ideological contagions, as I'm talking about, they tend to creep in there, don't they? Hey, the good thing is you're not waiting around for the Victorian election campaign to start sometime midway through next year. The actual Victorian election date's not till November 2026. In fact, the next state election, this snap election that's being called in Tasmania, I think the date is set for Saturday the 19th of July. Is there any work that you're doing with Tasmanians around some of these sorts of issues?
So we helped in the last Tasmanian election, which was also a snap election. We helped churches to run candidate forums, and we will be continuing to help churches to run candidate forums at the Tasmanian election as well. Tasmanian state election is very complicated because you choose one electorate and then that electorate elects 7 people out of the electorate. So it's kind of like a mini Senate election rather than what we'd know in New South Wales and Victoria for a lower house vote. So holding candidate forums is very complicated, but it's very, very valuable. So we get to hear what each party says, what they believe, and get to ask them issues that are important to Christians.
So look out for more of these Meet the Candidate forums that happen in local churches. This has become a really, really significant initiative that's come from Freedom for Faith, because while we talk about confronting politicians in the corridors of power, either side of government or whatever flavour they might be around those things, equipping local churches is actually one of the key things that you do, Mike.
Oh, it's far more important than walking around Parliament. All politics is local, and the most powerful voice that any local MP is going to hear are local people in their electorate going and talking to them. And the church is just a network of people who live in that area who believe the same thing. So the senior minister, the priest, the pastor is actually an incredibly powerful voice speaking to the local MP. And so are all the members of the congregation sending an email, making a phone call, asking for a meeting. This is how you persuade politicians. So in between elections, our role is to go and help people to connect with their local MPs and talk to them about religious freedom issues.
And really, just to confirm this, because I wasn't trying to suggest anything different, at the end of the day, it's what the policies are and what's legislated that is primarily what you're interested in, not necessarily around which party is elected, because you're not partisan, but those policies and those that legislation, that's primarily, that's the ultimate for you, isn't it?
Absolutely, because any group of people, but Christians are the most effective politically when both parties think that they could win our vote. If one party thinks they can win our vote and the other one thinks they never have a chance, then both of them end up ignoring us because they think they know how we're going to vote. But the reality is there are Christians who vote Labour, there are Christians who vote Liberal, there are Christians who vote National, there's Christians who vote for all sorts of parties. And so these parties should be battling for us, trying to find what can they offer us to get our vote. And importantly, allowing us to worship, to teach, to preach, and to live out our faith is one of the most important things for us.
Okay, so if there's a contagion around the robbery of religious freedom that's going on around the nation, some people will be saying, can't the federal government override anything that happens in the states? What are your perspectives here? Because I know you've had a petition that's been running for some time. Let us in on how powerful that petition can be with enough groundswell support coming in behind it.
So, first of all, can the federal government override the states? Yes, in certain limited circumstances. We live in a federation and a commonwealth, and so the federal government has some powers. The states have got other powers. So we always have to work with both state and federal government. But Anthony Albanese, when he was heading into the latest election, he made commitments to religious freedom. Most importantly, he committed that he would not be undermining religious freedom or changing it in any way unless there was bipartisan support. So he was not going to cut a deal with the Greens. He would only do things around religious freedom when if he had agreement from the coalition and they could do it in a bipartisan way. So the petition that we've been running for a while now is just to say, dear Prime Minister, thank you for that promise. We are calling on you to keep your promise. Keep your promise to protect religious freedom, our individual rights to proclaim what we believe, our organisational rights to run our institutions according to our faith. That includes employing people who believe in our faith. And we're just calling on the Prime Minister to protect those over the next 3 years.
Okay, keeping promises to protect religious freedom. And whenever you have these Meet the Candidate forums, what is being said is being kept for posterity and will be used to hold to account those sorts of political candidates and those local members who are talking about these sorts of things. There's a tendency, would you say, Mike, for people who are candidates and for politicians to say what the particular group sitting in front of them wants to hear. So when you actually have them saying the right things, you want to hold them to account for that.
Absolutely. Every politician is guilty of over-promising and under-delivering. And so what we need to do is keep demonstrating in a loving way, but in a firm way, that there are a lot of people, voters, who heard these promises and are expecting you to keep them. And so a petition is a really effective way of getting a lot of people saying, we're calling on you to protect these rights. You could also write to your local MP. You could have meetings with your local MP and just encourage them. Hey, did you know there are heaps and heaps of churches, heaps of Christians in your electorate, and we're concerned about this?
All right, to connect with our guest today, Mike Southon, he's Executive Director of Freedom for Faith. You can do so at freedomforfaith.org.au. And I imagine this time of year too, I'm assuming that Freedom for Faith has some financial needs. You've got a bit of an appeal going for end of financial year. How does that look for you, Mike?
Well, leading up to the Victorian election, we want to be supporting and helping a lot of churches to be engaging with their politicians. And that just requires people to be able to make phone calls, people to be able to meet with the local church ministers. And so we are trying to raise money so that we've got the staff who can be supporting the churches across Victoria to be able to protect their religious freedoms.
Okay, and while we've been talking about Victoria, mindful too, there's a Tasmanian election coming up Saturday the 19th of July. Around the nation, South Australia going to the polls on the 21st of March next year, and then the New South Wales next state election before the 27th of March, as far out as 2027. Mike Southon, always great getting your insights, and I know there'll be a lot of listeners who are concerned to make sure that you've got everything you need to keep on fighting the good fight in the way that you do. freedomforfaith.org.au. Mike, thanks so much for updating listeners today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.